Now, to kick off in the five largest issues that are facing the primary sector here in New Zealand, it would have to kick off with fresh water. So I took the time to ask our five agricultural spokespeople for the five major parties earlier this week. In August this year, the National Environmental Standards for Freshwater was introduced and set requirements for carrying out certain activities that poses risk to freshwater ecosystems. How will your party seek to achieve the outcomes of improving freshwater quality whilst balancing the profitability of the landowner?
Sarah, we've rolled out new freshwater standards, national policy statement and national environment standards that lay out the temporary measures in place to stop any further water degradation. And we went into government 3 years ago on the basis that we would make improvements in this area. National had rolled out an NPS. They were achieving or hoping to achieve weightable standards. The general consensus of that was not an adequate target, and so we set it at swimmable over a generation. There are some areas in the country that have degraded water. There are some high-risk catchments, and we've identified those. The vast majority of farmers across our country have been doing a huge amount over the last 20 to 30 years to improve their general standards around freshwater management, on-farm practice, fencing waterways and the such like. But the reality is, in some areas, the quantum of dairy cows in particular has put pressure on waterways, and we're going to have to make progress there. We've committed to work through an implementation group with the regional councils to make sure that the temporary measures, such as consenting and where that is required, are realistic, but that we help farmers through farm plans, integrated farm plans where possible, to get in place the appropriate measures for each and every farm and farmer, because as we know on the ground, it's the work that farmers do ultimately that will protect the waterways, and that's what we all want to achieve.
David Bennett from the National Party.
Yeah, it's been the most controversial part of the election campaign from a primary sector point of view around their freshwater standards. Everybody wants to have high freshwater standards, and they want to have the ability to use their rivers as they wish to, and we're all going to have a much more sustainable focus as farmers going forward. So those are givens. It's just making sure that the rules are something that are compatible with what farmers can do, are based on good science, and take into account farming practices. And farmers have not been able to see how they can actually apply them in practice. The winter stocking rates in the Southland, for example, have shown to be tremendously difficult in a region where you have 100 days where there is no grass growth, so you have to do winter stocking. The nitrogen rules are going to have a major effect through the Canterbury and other regions where there's irrigation. So, and the slope and fencing rules, the maps for those have shown difficulty there as well. So what National wants to do is we want to work with farmers and farmer organisations to develop rules that are fit for purpose, that are practical and are scientific and not just set in Wellington. And we also want to give a degree of regional autonomy. So regions can mix and match to take into account their climatic conditions, their farming practices, and what they need to do to achieve what is required in their catchment.
Eugenie Sage from the Green Party.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you all for listening. The Greens know that for exporting our food and fibre products overseas, everyone relies on that 100% clean green image. So the National Policy Statement for Fresh Water and the standards in it are about helping give integrity to that brand, which allows a premium for exports. And the National Policy Statement and the standards were developed with considerable input from farmer stakeholders, and we think they represent the best way to actually protect waterways, to make them swimmable within a generation. And we know that farmers want swimmable water as well. And it's also the government's Jobs for Nature package, 700 million of that, which the Green Party totally supports, are going into improving sustainable land and water management. Things like funds for nurseries, riparian planting, so that we can buffer waterways better and work to protect against erosion. So it's a whole range of solutions that are providing the support as well as the regulatory underpinning.
Mark Cameron from the ACT Party.
Look, the simple reality is ACT supports both the desire to continue doing what farmers have done at a regional level so fastidiously well. I mean, sadly, what's happened in the current framework, the current government has looked through a myopic lens with a big umbrella approach to quite difficult problems at a regional level. A lot of what's actually gone on in the space in and around freshwater, whether it's the pugging reality in Southland or the stock exclusion fencing, has often, a lot of these problems have actually been mitigated by farmers and council at regional and right at farm gate levels. And as the ACT Party, we sit in support of that. Farmers are their own best stewards and conservationists of the land. So we want to create an environment where farmers can have a tailored solution driven by industry, the narrative shared by a council level reality, and let farmers continue their own best endeavours because they're the best at it. The current framework from the current government, in many instances, is not just simply not tenable.
Mark Patterson from the New Zealand First Party.
I mean, we support the direction of travel. There's no doubt about that. I think the recent lower figures that came out suggested that, we still have work to do, and we've got to be at best practice at scale. And despite, the great work that's going on farm, we just haven't seen a turnaround in those figures yet. But having said that, I'm on record, and New Zealand First on record, as saying as originally introduced, they're unworkable and impractical. We have seen some changes, which has been good, and we lobbied for those. But I think there's probably 4 specific areas where we would like to see some amendments and like to influence some change. I mean, the pugging rule, that 50%, and less than 5 centimetres is just impractical, and try working that in Southland at the moment after flooding event. So that does have to be amended. The resowing dates need some flexibility, for the very same reasons. The DIN levels, there's some real danger there, particularly if we get a Labor Green government, that they're going to come down quite hard, and they're not settled yet. I might remind everyone, but I guess one of the main areas around compliance is to get immediately to certified farm environment plans rather than resource consenting, which is a bit of a blunt tool and pretty compliance heavy potentially. Whereas if we can knit that into wider farm environment plans, which I think we've got till 2022 to do that, we've got some existing rights in terms of winter cropping and that through the RMA. So 2021 we can handle. 2022, in our view, we should be able to have those certified farm environment plans up to cut that compliance.
All right, we have heard there in our very first question to our 5 agricultural spokespeople for the 5 major political parties here ahead of the 2020 New Zealand election this Saturday. And of course, it would have to be around freshwater to kick us off. I asked them, if you've just joined us, how would your party seek to achieve the outcomes of improving freshwater quality whilst balancing the profitability of landowners? What I felt not a lot of them got that last part straight off the bat, and predictable to point in terms of different alliances. Throughout Sarah's Country's election special, we will be joined by expert commentators from the industry who live and breathe each of these topics every single day to get their thoughts and summarise what they have just heard. So for Freshwater, on Sarah's Country, Monday through Wednesday, every week in alliance with Farmers Weekly, I love to have a chat to Landpro's Kate Scott on these moving regulations to keep farmers up to date. And Kate joins us now. Kate, well, I'm just going to work through a couple of the comments that I've made note on down below. Firstly, what stood out for me was a very bold comment from Eugenie Sage that these freshwater regulations were brought in with huge consultation from farmers.
Yeah, look, Sarah, that was certainly something that stood out for me as well. I was listening to Ms. Sage say that there was considerable input from farmer stakeholders, and at that point thought that, yes, the process did take some time, but I'm not convinced that I would probably share the same view that there was, huge input and or even great engagement around the way that they actually undertook consultation at, the busiest time of year last year in terms of getting that input. So I didn't probably share the same view as Ms. Sage did on that.
And of course, Damien O'Connor has said that he's very proud of an implementation group with regional councils to help farmers through their integrated farm plans. I mean, we're only talking within the last month or two around detail, but you live and breathe this on the ground every day, talking between regional councils and farmers. And is this true? Is this implementation group actually tangibly going to help farmers through navigating a regulation which potentially could change again?
Yeah, look, I think like all of these things, the proof's going to be in the pudding, right? So this group, as far as I'm aware, has only recently convened, and we haven't seen any of the detail coming out around how they suggest that it's going to be implemented. And I think it's a bit of a stretch to suggest that they've solved all the problems yet, because we haven't seen that. So, look, I have every faith that they will come together and work well together to try and find ways to implement it. But for me, it actually comes back to the fact that perhaps had we have taken a little bit of time at the outset and made sure that these regulations were drafted in a practical and pragmatic way, we might not have to have kind of gone back to the beginning to work out how we're going to implement it. So sometimes a little bit of time up front can avoid all these back-end changes that now need to happen.
Now, of course, no surprises there with regards to National saying very proudly around their national policy statement for freshwater in terms of what Labour Green New Zealand First Coalition government inherited. How far have we actually come from 3 years ago on freshwater regulations?
Yeah, so the new national policy statement I guess strengthens the earlier 2014 version, and the concept of Te Mana o Te Wai was already framed out in that, but what we've seen in this new version is it's brought more detail to that. So this whole hierarchy of use, so to the values of the river first, and then to the people, and then to all the other uses. So that's the detail that has actually come about in this newest version. So I think we have moved further along, and I guess the question remains to be seen how the councils now go about and implement this, as they have to go through updating all of their regional plans. And that's still a process that we've got to see roll out. And I guess one of the interesting things that I think Ms. Sage talked about in her comments was about the fact that we needed to see change happening over a generation. Yet to me, the NPS doesn't really talk about timeframes or generations. The only mention of a timeframe that it actually has in there is it says that councils must identify a timeframe to achieve the goals that they set. So it's all very well talking about this being generational change, but what is the actual timeframe to ensure that our farming and agricultural businesses can remain profitable, but also give effect to good environmental outcomes? And I thought it was pretty interesting that all of our spokespeople today didn't actually cover off the second part of your question around how we balance the need for a strong environment alongside profitable farm businesses.
Absolutely. And of course, Mark Patterson's backyard is most affected by being effectively told how to farm through these rules. And this is through Otago and Southland of the pugging rules and when to have crops in the ground. How do you feel that not having New Zealand First a part of a potential Labour Green government will really genuinely affect some of that pragmatic approach to the actual understanding of being able to implement this on farm?
Yeah, look, I think, obviously Mark, he's outlined that, he sees, the pugging and the resowing dates as areas that need further refinement. And I guess, one of my first questions might be, well, look, they've also been, New Zealand First have been part of the government and presumably have had input into the creation of these standards and rules up until this point. So if it was, such an issue for them now, why was it not raised at the time? And who knows what goes on in the back end. But similarly, I think to also give credit to Minister O'Connor, he has also talked about the fact that there are some impractical aspects of the rules as they've been drafted and as they lie now. So look, I think that the optimist in me hopes that we will actually see some refinement, especially to the pugging and to the sowing dates. I mean, we only have to look at what's been happening down here in Otago and Southland over the last couple of weeks. We've had 20 odd degrees, we've had frostbiting, we've had snow, and I can say now that no one's probably going to be in a position to be planting their crops come the 1st of November. So here's hoping that we see some pragmatism, whichever government is elected after the 17th of October, and we see some real practical application of the rules.
And we do have to make point, it's our first introduction to our 5 agricultural spokespeople, one of which you would have just seen there, not a lot of people may have been introduced to, which is the ACT agricultural spokesman, Mark Cameron, that really stood out and said farmers are the best stewards of their environment. And you know what? Mark is actually a dairy farmer in Northland. How much of politicians having general rural connection and actively working in the farming and community, bringing that forward now, Kate, do you think that we're really lacking in terms of a rural voice within this next government? I mean, ACT, if they get in with, say, 11 seats, they still do have Mark in there to be able to represent, regardless of whether ACT are in the forming part of that government or not.
Yeah, look, I think obviously whatever the issue might be, whether it's agricultural issues or it's climate change or whether it's small business, certainly having people sitting around the table who have first-hand experience of that is always going to enrich the conversation, because you can actually bring a real-world perspective to that. So, look, I think, the more people who can sit around that table, connect, the better outcomes we're likely to have. Mm-hmm. I mean, the other interesting thing, that I've taken from what all of our spokespeople have said today is that if you look at what each of them have said on their own, and you could pick and choose, all the important bits that they actually bring to the table, I think you'd end up with such great outcomes. I think the point that Eugenie made about the fact that we need to make sure that we're trading on our brand and we need to demonstrate that, I couldn't agree more, and I think you'd find most of industry support, the direction of travel. But my question is the NES and the NPS the right approach to actually achieve that? And is it going to create the transparency, and is it going to create the value add that we think it might? So if you could take that, and you could take the points that Mark Cameron made around the stewardship on the ground, and you could take Mark Patterson's piece around the fact that we actually need to be, more pragmatic and bringing forward our farm environment plans more quickly, and the work that Damien's already crafted, then all of a sudden we kind of have potentially a really great outcome. But it's how do you remove the politics that falls in the middle, I guess, to get to that point.
Absolutely. Lastly, Kate, before you go, how far have we come since water was the big political football of the 2017 election?
Look, I think it certainly has heated up since 2017, and I think if I was a betting person, I might place bets that during this next term of government, we're only going to continue to see, more focus on water and the challenges around, how we use it, what it looks like, where we should use it, and how we make sure that we actually look after it. So I'm fairly certain it's not a topic that's going away anytime soon.
Thank you so much, Kate Scott, Managing Director of Landpro.